generations. And now, the power of two restores the one.
We got a bidet. Hey everybody, and welcome back for another video. In today's video, we got our very first movie review of 2025, and that is going to be Peter Pan's Neverland. This is the new horror film that is out. It was a very limited release for us. It was only for 3 days, and it was Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, so a very, very odd days to be released. But it is the next installment in the Pooniverse series. So if you've seen Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 1 and 2, this is the next film in that series. Also, what's been revealed in the past is that a lot of these people will come around and be in one movie altogether at some point. So we're kind of getting these, I would say, origin films in a way to kind of get the feel of what these characters are about first, and then we'll get, some crazy um, monster movie here, not too far off in the I think it's even this year, but so I'm here to tell you about this Peter Pan film, what I thought about it without spoilers, give it a rating, and then talk about the movie in a little bit more detail. You may be noticing it's just me. We do not have Sarah with us today, and that's because she left 30 minutes into the film. What does that mean? That means this movie is pretty gory. I feel like they ramped up the gore in this film quite a bit in relation to the Winnie the Pooh movies. I don't remember exactly the gore level of the first two, but they were never to a point where I would compare them to like Terrifier, which is what I would do with this one. At times it felt like it was gory just to be gory, but at the same time, that's kind of where some of these movies are heading towards. Um, I do think this is the best one of the three so far, so that's good news if you're a fan of this series. But what I would also say with that is that it still has its flaws. I felt like the story wasn't like super well developed. I think the majority of the lore elements was kind of like up to your interpretation. I think it was an hour and 47 minutes to a point based on what the story was. I feel like it felt kind of long for what it was. It kind of felt like a 2 hour film, maybe like 2 hours 15. And I think that's just because they linger a little bit on some of this stuff. Like when I get to the spoiler section and I tell you what happened in this movie, you're probably going to be like, it took that long to do that? Yeah, it did. Um, so yeah, it's better than the other two. It's a bit more gory. I did like that there was some Easter eggs in here of like Peter Pan type stuff. Like TikTok crocodile isn't mentioned per se, let alone in your face. But there's a lot of times in this movie where like there's a video of a crocodile eating stuff in the background, and it's very apparent sometimes too. Like there's a scene where um, two characters go to like grasp hands together. They weren't shaking hands. They were like embracing a little bit, and then the shot of the crocodile was like right there behind their hands. So I feel like there were times that they were trying to emphasize like, hey, here's some more things from the Peter Pan lore that you know and love. And then they just, they did a good job with bringing in the Peter Pan stuff that we already know, but at the same time, when they're trying to set themselves apart and create their own film in a horror genre, that's where I think they kind of lacked a little bit. So, if I were to give this movie a rating, I would probably give this movie probably a 5 out of 10. I would say that this is a pretty average film. Again, I don't think it's above average, but at the same time, they are progressing and getting better at these movies. Although I do think they're going to fall flat on their face with Bambi. I really don't see how that movie can be fantastic, but I guess we'll see. I feel like, monster movies like that are kind of like they have to be done really well. So like Cujo, that's a very well-known film about, a dog that attacks people and it's popular and it was well written. Stephen King, big name. And I don't know, I just feel like that movie's not going to do super well. But let's get back to Peter Pan. So, I think it's an average film. I think the gore was definitely ramped up a bit. I do think it added to it a little bit. It wasn't completely mindless, but at the same time, it was a bit much to the other people that were there. But so let's talk about the movie. Then we can just kind of, get into some nitty gritties. Okay, so let's move on to the spoiler section. So the beginning of this film doesn't like jump right into the main narrative of the story. We kind of get to understand what it's like to encounter Peter. Is Peter works, I should say, works at a circus and points to kids in the crowd and delivers a balloon, to be entertaining and stuff like that. And in the beginning of this film, Peter points at a kid in the crowd, hands the kid a balloon, and then after this circus intro, we get to follow this kid and the kid's mom back to their place. It's gonna be a just your average night going back to sleep. The mom goes to take a shower, and here's Peter opening up the floorboard, kind of like the trailer where we see it's almost like the Evil Dead remake situation where we see the girl, peeking through and then antagonizing people. It's kind of like that with Peter, and Peter is trying to convince this child to go with them to Neverland. And so the kid's kind of like hesitant at first, but then the kid gets closer and closer and is kind of liking how Peter is playing with the kid a little bit. Peter is like, "Hi, I'm Peter," and puts their hand out and to, shake the kid's hand. But also, I feel like us as the audience, we know that Peter is trying to pull the kid in to kidnap the kid. And so the kid gets really close to Peter, is almost going to grab Peter's hand, and then the mom comes out. And the mom flips, smacks Peter so that she could grab her kid and pull her kid away from Peter. Peter does not like that they got smacked the way that they did. And so the mom and the kid run away. They're trying to hide themselves. And then Peter comes back and just destroys the mom. This is kind of like it's kind of like the initiation of the film, where if you're at this point and you can take this kind of gore, then you can probably stick around to the end. If you cannot take this kind of gore, well, then you might want to leave. Because basically what happens is that Peter scalps the mom and then stabs the mom a whole bunch of times to kill her. And then Peter takes the child, and then we cut to present day, basically. I think it's like 15 years later. And so we meet our group. We got Michael, Wendy, and John. It is Michael's birthday at this point. And so we kind of open up with that. It's kind of like a cheery little opening. And Michael's on his way to school. We find out that Michael has this really good friend Joey at school. They do a lot of stuff together. They take pictures together. They even hold hands together. And so after we get like a school day, Michael's on his way home from school. He's supposed to. See, I don't quite understand this. So Michael was supposed to go home with Wendy. Like Wendy was there to pick up Michael. And unless Michael was supposed to put his bike in Wendy's car, it didn't make a whole lot of sense why she would be picking him up. So she completely misses that Michael is, coming out of the school because she's chit-chatting with her boyfriend. And Michael completely blows by her. And Michael's on his way home, going through this road that's kind of like in a forest. And there's this line where um, it's strung up between a couple of trees, and it Michael hits this line and flips off his bike. Which then we get to see the van that Peter uses, right? And so us as the audience knows this is bad news coming, and then Michael's like, "What is going on?" And so Peter pops up and grabs Michael, and then takes Michael to Peter's van. So Michael is now kidnapped by Peter. Of course, Wendy never brought Michael home, so Wendy's family is kind of on alert about Michael is now missing. Uh, we we see what Peter Pan's house is like. I would probably call it Peter Pan's lair to a point. It seems like an abandoned house. It's very similar, in my opinion, to the House of a Thousand Corpses, if you've seen that movie. Very run down, probably abandoned. That's probably why Peter Pan lives there and nobody knows about Peter Pan. So Michael is kidnapped. Michael's given his own room. And what we find out here is that Peter Pan is not living alone. Peter Pan also has Tinkerbell living in the house. And Tinkerbell is a bit older. And so we kind of learn about Tinkerbell's background because there's two things that happen here. One, when Wendy is trying to find out more information about where Michael could have been taken to, she realizes that there's a similar incident that happened to somebody else's child. Somebody else's child was taken mysteriously and they never found them. And so Wendy goes to talk to this parent, and the parent is much older, which is kind of the connection here. But this parent is talking about how they had a child that went missing, and this child was very special to them because the child was their son, but their son felt like they were a woman in a boy's body. And we can kind of see this emphasized a little bit more too because the child has a pink backpack with unicorns, nails painted pink, a whole bunch of things that, show this kid being more of a woman. And so Peter Pan kidnapped this child, and then they never heard about the child again. The connection here is that that kidnapped child is Tinkerbell. And so the big thing here is because we know that Peter Pan wants to kidnap children to take the children to Neverland. And in this movie, Peter Pan is not like this character that we know from Disney, where Peter is taking kids to an island and having a great time, and then when Captain Hook shows up, Captain Hook is the problem. Here, it's more of a person that grew up with a bad childhood, and they obsessed about Peter Pan. And now what they want to do is they want to, kidnap kids. They want to control people and basically make all these other people part of the Peter Pan story. And so this child that was kidnapped that identified as a woman was special to Peter. And the reason why this is kind of a big thing that we find out like halfway through the film, and honestly, we find out in kind of a uh, we, we get to look at Peter Pan's naked body. That's how we find out. At least based on what I interpret this as, especially since Tinkerbell was um, considered special to Peter Pan, is that we see Peter Pan naked, and then the genitalia in the front, It looks like there was some sort of operation to make Peter Pan a trans woman. And so that's why I think Peter Pan sees Tinkerbell as a special child because they identify the same. They're both trans women. As opposed to the other children that Peter Pan kidnaps, Peter Pan, she wants to take them to Neverland, which Peter is very secretive about what that means throughout the majority of the film. But what we find out is that that means that Peter wants to suffocate the children and then basically put them in a box that says RIP. And that's sending the children off to Neverland. So how does this movie progress? Because we have a whole bunch of this background information. Um, Peter sees that in Michael's, I can't remember if it was Michael's backpack or just a picture that Michael was looking at, but Peter realizes that Michael has a really good friend, which is Joey. And so Peter says to Michael, "Would you like to have a friend here?" And of course, Michael pleads no because Michael doesn't want Joey to be in the same situation. But Peter Pan takes it upon herself to go and track down Joey. So first attempt to track down Joey is to have a stalled, quote unquote, stalled car in the middle of the road. This is in the trailer where there's a bus that wants to get through, but the road is blocked. So the bus driver comes out to help Peter. Turns out Peter kills the bus driver and then goes on the bus, looks at all the children, notices that Joey is not on the bus, and then says, you know, who wants to go to Neverland with me? And that's a big part of the film because this is a part of the film where 16 children are murdered. They're taken off the bus, thrown in the woods, and then we see a whole bunch of children lying on the ground dead. And it's actually one of the few parts that John gets in this film, the one of the siblings between, Wendy, Michael, and John, because John comes into the house and says to Wendy, there's a bunch of kids that were murdered. It's terrible. They like, have you seen the news? And and that's why I think it's kind of sad about Jonathan's character because there's not a whole lot there for John to do. Most of the film is taken up by Wendy and Michael. But anyways, so Peter realizes that Joey was not on the bus. So Peter tracks Joey to Joey's house. And also, coincidentally, this is also a part of the film where Wendy is going over to Joey's family's house as well. And so when Peter is doing a home invasion, basically murdering all of Joey's family, Wendy notices that something's going on and hides in the house and is able to hide from Peter and not get caught. However, Joey does get found by Peter and is taken to what I would say, like I said, is like Peter's lair. Peter is using the van that we saw earlier in the film, and Wendy takes the family car from Joey's parents and follows Peter. So when Peter gets to the house, like I said, Wendy is following closely behind, but not enough for Peter to be aware that Wendy's behind her. So Peter gets back to the house, takes Joey in, which it's really interesting because this is a little Easter egg. Joey is actually wearing an advertisement for the first Winnie the Pooh movie, which I thought was kind of weird that there's like I don't know, 8-year-old wearing that poster. I wouldn't if I had an 8-year-old, I wouldn't let them watch that movie, but I digress. Um, it's just like a funny little plug-in. But now Michael and Joey is at Peter's house. Peter does this little eeny, meeny, miny, mo situation where Peter lands on Joey and decides that Joey is going to be the first one to go to Neverland between the two boys that are kidnapped. So that happens off camera. We do get a handful of interactions with Michael and Tinkerbell, where Tinkerbell is kind of realizing that what Peter is doing is not good, which is it's kind of strange that this happens because we learn that there's more than just Michael and Joey in this house, let alone the other children that Peter has killed. So it's kind of weird that now is the time that Tinkerbell is having a change of heart, but Tinkerbell is kind of noticing that Peter is not doing good things. So it's kind of like a a change in the character here because there's a handful of interactions between Peter and Tinkerbell where Tinkerbell's kind of like, what are you doing with those kids? Exactly. And Peter is very secretive about it until much later, where when Wendy comes into the house and sneaks in, um, Wendy interacts with Tinkerbell at one point and says to Tinkerbell, "You're the kid." Like Wendy makes the connection that this was the child that was taken from the family that she talked to earlier on, and is telling Tinkerbell, "Your family misses you." Which is another reason why Tinkerbell switched here because to being on the kid's side as opposed to Peter's, because Peter had been telling Tinkerbell this whole time that Tinkerbell's parents did not want her and that only Peter appreciated Tinkerbell. So with this information, uh, so it, it kind of goes back and forth a lot here towards the end because this is the end of the film where Wendy gets into Michael's room. There's a lock on it. I didn't catch how she knew the lock passcode, but she did. And she opened up the door, found Michael, and then there's an interaction between Peter and Tinkerbell where Peter is alerted that somebody else that's not supposed to be there is in the house. Gets really mad at Tinkerbell, but then goes and checks out what's going on in Michael's room. And even though Michael could potentially lie and say nobody else is there, the one thing that kind of gives it away to Peter that something is up is that the lock is undone, right? So Peter's in the room talking to Michael, saying, "Hey, I know there's something going on. What is going on?" And Michael stalls just long enough for Wendy to count like one, two, three, and then she yelled, "Run!" at Michael because the door's open. And she pushes a huge toy bear onto Peter to knock Peter down. And then the two kids try to take off. And Tinkerbell is again indecisive, doesn't know whether to help them or not, but ends up letting them go. And the kids get separated. So Wendy takes off, and I Michael, I think Michael gets, I can't remember. I think Michael gets retaken by Peter. I can't remember if Michael got away. Anyways, eventually what happens is that Wendy finds Joey. Like remember, Joey was supposed to be taken to Neverland. She finds Joey in a coffin that says "Rip" on it, rest in peace, and Joey is still alive. So this is a good thing. Wendy takes care of Joey and finds a way in the basement to break some boards so that Joey can get out of the house and hopefully run to get some help. Oh, I remember what's going on with Michael. Michael runs away and is hiding basically because he eventually comes back to the kitchen, which is where most of Peter and Tinkerbell's interactions happen. He gets back to the kitchen, he hides under the table, and we see an interaction between Peter and Tinkerbell where Peter is realizing that Tinkerbell is betraying her. And so I call this scene the clipping of Tinkerbell's wings because Peter basically assaults Tinkerbell, like slams Tinkerbell on a table, puts her on a floor, mangles her arms, like twists and break and you name it, and then chops off the arms of Tinkerbell. So like it's very, very gory. Um, while this is all happening, Wendy is still poking around downstairs and someone else scares her. She thinks it's Peter, but it's not. It's somebody that is chained up in the basement. And there's this photo on the ground where we find out that it's actually the child from the very beginning of the film, from when the mom was scalped. Um, this child had their hand chopped off and replaced with a hook. So this is Peter's way again of making one of the characters from the Peter Pan story be part of their reality, which is pretty grotesque if you think about it. Um, so Wendy wants to save this person, but because they're chained up, she doesn't really know how to, and so she just tells the person like, "Hey, I'll get some help." And I'll get back to that character here in a minute, and I'll talk about why it doesn't really what something doesn't really make any sense. But Wendy goes back to find Michael. Michael does contact the police, and they take quite some time to locate them because the police basically finds them through the phone that they're using. But Wendy has like three different fights between her and Peter. And eventually, what it boils down to is that uh, Wendy smacks Peter a couple of times, knocks Peter to the ground, and Michael gets some hits into Peter. And even when it seems like Peter is going to be down and out, we get the famous, getting back up, kind of like Michael Myers. And I think Peter says something like, "You ruined everything." And then the finishing blow for Peter is that the Hook character is now released. Now, I don't understand if Wendy somehow went back and we just didn't see it on camera and released the Hook character, or if the Hook character figured out a way to get unhooked. Um, no pun intended. And so Hook gashes into Peter's like shoulder and then pulls Peter, back into the darkness essentially. And then our heroes are saved by the police. Um, we go to a scene where now it is Michael's birthday again, so I would think like a year later, and the phone rings. Now, earlier in the film, when Michael was first being thought of being taken, the mom got a phone call, and the phone call was just like circus music playing. And I'm pretty sure Peter said something like, you won't find your kid, or you won't get your kid back. Says something. And so Wendy goes to pick up a phone that's ringing, and when she answers the phone, it's that circus music again. So that's kind of like a hint of Peter's not really dead. So some other things that may be kind of significant to know about, yeah, if you're interested. In the very beginning, like I mentioned, there's this fight between Peter and the child's mom. The child's mom gashes Peter's face, even to the point where Peter's face is like kind of dangling off of their face. And so to kind of make themselves feel or look more um, not scary, I would say more appealing to talk to because remember, Peter wants to lure children, so probably shouldn't look so scary. Peter does go to a Halloween store and basically, or a party store, and takes a mask off the shelf. That's where we see, or that's how the mask is brought into things. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else super significant here. That's pretty much it. So, like I said, the story is kind of bare bones because it's kidnap Michael, kidnap Joey, altercation at the end, movie's done. Uh, I kind of wish there was a little bit more lore, but again, what this movie is it's a person that grew up really liking the Peter Pan story. It's even to the point where Peter believes that she sees the Peter Pan's shadow on the wall. And also, there is a scene where Peter seems to be levitating, and I was like, oh, is this where they're gonna make the switch and actually make it, something to do with going to Neverland? But I think it was all in Peter's head, thinking that that they could float. Maybe they were just imagining it because Tinkerbell comes into the room and immediately Peter's still standing on the floor. So I don't think that there's some sort of like supernatural thing going on here. It's just somebody that is obsessed with the story of Peter Pan and wants to make their life surrounded by like the characters and all the different things that has to do with Peter Pan involved. We do see some like TikTok crocodile type references. There's a lot of times where there's a crocodile on screen, like on a TV screen in the background. There's times where there's crocodiles on a birthday card. So they did try to make it where there was a lot of elements built into this movie that refers to Peter Pan stories of the past, but also trying to establish their own horror take on it. From what I understand, this Peter Pan character is supposed to be in the Monsters Assembled movie, so I don't think it's the last that we will see of Peter Pan. So if you're like me, well, I'm excited to go see the Monsters Assembled movie. Um, Hopefully you'll come back here and hear my thoughts about it. So, if you enjoy this type of video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Drop us a like if you like the video and drop us a comment letting us know your thoughts on Peter Pan Neverland Nightmare. Are you in agreement with me that this is probably the best one so far, or do you think it was awful? And then, as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.